What's good? It's Woog. Saul Canelo Alvarez just stopped Billy Joe Saunders at the end of the 8th round. And for the magnitude of the fight, the amount of people in attendance, it was like a record-breaking indoor crowd, and just the stakes with 3 of the titles at 168 on the line. You've got the biggest superstar in boxing, Canelo Alvarez, taking on a very slick, unorthodox, elusive, and undefeated WBO champion, Billy Joe Saunders, who was also a WBO champion at the weight class below 160. And so for as big as an occasion as this was, very anticlimactic ending. I mean, the action it wasn't an action-packed fight, and I don't think most people who knew the style of Billy Joe Saunders and knew what Canelo was going to be up against were expecting, a ton of fireworks. It was going to be a bit of cat and mouse. Can Billy Joe frustrate and confuse Canelo to the point where he's racking up the rounds and Canelo finds himself playing catch up but unable to close the gap? And only some thought that Billy Joe would even have an advantage in winning the early rounds. Some people just thought that Canelo was going to have very little to no trouble with Billy Joe. I thought that this was going to go the distance. I thought it was going to look like a 115, 113 type fight, basically 7 rounds to 5, but was going to be scored by the judges like 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4. We're going into the scorecards thinking, I wonder what they're going to say. But then when they read the scorecards, you're like, damn, Billy Joe didn't have a chance, because a lot of the close rounds would go to Canelo, even if to many of us, the viewers, we might have thought that Billy Joe should have won that round. Well, Billy Joe was giving Canelo problems, as many expected him to, and I thought he was winning most of the early rounds. So at the end of the 8th round, when they stopped the fight after Canelo caught him, it looks like it might have broken his orbital bone. It looks like it definitely damaged something. It immediately caused his eye to shut, and then while they were in the corner between the 8th and 9th, they waved it off because Billy Joe couldn't see, and you saw the ambulance pull up at the end of the broadcast, and it just wasn't a great situation facially for Billy Joe. But I had the fight scored 5 rounds to 3 in favor of Billy Joe Saunders. Now, what did the judges have? They actually had, at the time of the stoppage, 2 of them had it 6 rounds to 2 for Canelo, and then the other 5 to 3 for Canelo. So think about that. Like, tell me if I'm missing something here. I'm watching the fight, and I'm like, damn, it looks like Canelo's starting to, close the distance, and Billy Joe is starting to slow down, by the middle rounds. But I thought that he won, 3 out of the first 4 rounds. He should have at least won 2 out of those first 4 rounds. But then he even started to kick it into high gear in the 6th and 7th round, where he started to let his hands go a little bit more. You started seeing Canelo get pasted up a bit, and Canelo started missing, and the missing started to look obvious, where Billy Joe would, kind of demonstrate to the crowd that he's in control, that Canelo's not touching him. And so I thought, Canelo, damn, you're on the clock. You've got to close this gap, and you've got to do some damage. You've got to turn this thing around and really seize control, so there isn't anything left to question when you go to the scorecards. Not to say that Canelo needed a knockout to win this fight. I mean, we were only at the end of the 8th round, and I think it could have been scored anywhere from maybe 4 rounds to 4 even, to about what I had it, 5 rounds to 3. But 5 rounds to 3 for Canelo, or even worse, 6 rounds to 2 in favor of Canelo? I didn't see that. Well, one thing that I did see as I'm watching the fight is, Billy Joe would try to throw his straight left hand and then would dip off to the side. And Canelo was doing 2 things I thought extremely well. One, he went to the body early and often, just as I really felt that he needed to do to not only inflict damage and pain, but to slow down the guy who wants to keep his feet moving, wants to use that entire bigger ring that he negotiated for, and wanted to keep Canelo on the hunt, keep Canelo following, missing, getting tap, tap, tap. Billy Joe doesn't carry a super heavy punch, but he is letting his hands go, and Canelo was eating some of those punches while, again, missing most of what he was throwing up top, but he was splashing to the body. Anytime he would trap Billy Joe just for a moment, against the ropes. He would find that opportunity, boom, just let his hand go to the body, rip him to the body, and you would see the effect. Billy Joe would take a step out, try to bring the fight back to the middle of the ring. Because, again, you do not want your back touching the ropes too often against Canelo. Well, the other thing that Canelo was doing really well was trying to anticipate the direction that Billy Joe was dipping his head after throwing his punches, after throwing his combination or just one punch pot shot. He would dip off to the same way, and you saw Canelo throwing that right hand low, trying to meet his head at that intersection as Billy Joe is slipping out of a punch that he's expecting to come up top. So I saw Canelo attempt this what seemed like a few times. And sometimes he would land, but not totally flush. Sometimes he would miss, but you got where he was going with that. And the fact that you could tell that that's where Canelo was looking to catch Billy Joe, I was wondering, why does Billy Joe keep on dipping to that same side? He played with fire and nearly got burnt a couple times because Canelo was sitting down on that punch. I mean, it was with the power that he was throwing the body shots, but he was, again, saying, hey, Billy Joe keeps dipping his head to this side, thinking that he's going to evade a headshot. Let's catch him as he's moving to that spot. So again, near miss, grazing shot, and then finally in the 8th round, boom, he got all of it. He didn't get him in the jaw in a way where it would knock him out or get him in the side of the head to where it would just totally ruin his balance, but he caught him flush in the eye and ended the fight nonetheless. He basically broke his face, so to speak. And so that's why you see in the finishing sequence, Canelo kind of did the pull counter. Remember, Floyd would always look the punch back, keep the punch, the extended opponent's punch right here, and then would counter with his own with some leverage into it, and then he would dip out of harm's way. Canelo's pull counter in this case was beautiful. It was a little different though because he was throwing that punch lower, again, trying to meet Billy Joe's head, dipping off to that side, and again, he caught him flush, right on the eye. You saw Billy Joe's body language change immediately. He tried to demonstrate to the crowd that he wasn't hurt, but you saw him stop moving laterally as confidently as he was before. He started kind of lumbering and slowly moving backwards, where Canelo then started to land a few more hard punches before the end of that round, which again was the end of the fight. But Canelo, as soon as he landed that punch, knew that he had done some significant damage. He supposedly told his corner between rounds, he's not coming back out to answer the bell. I think I just broke his cheek. And if that's what he really said to his corner, it turns out he was right. So you could even see in the clip, Canelo, after launching that low punch to the head, catching Billy Joe, he had a look that said, yeah, I got him that time. And then you saw Canelo start to showboat and to start waving, the crowd in, putting both of his hands up, inviting the crowd to cheer him on, knowing that he had a damaged opponent. So Canelo scores the stoppage victory. He collects his 3rd out of the 4 titles at 168. You're going to hear a lot of people criticizing Billy Joe's heart and basically saying, like I saw Fernando Vargas, and I'm not going to question his heart because he, did continue to fight, or at least wanted to continue to fight after he received the facial damage against Shane Mosley in their first fight. They then had a rematch and Shane Mosley knocked him out in the rematch, but Vargas posted something on Instagram trying to demonstrate the type of warrior he was versus what he saw in Billy Joe Saunders' decision to not want to continue fighting. Billy Joe, I think, said he couldn't see out of the eye. So I'm not going to take it as far as, the former champ Fernando Vargas took it. I think Billy Joe fought a very spirited fight. I think he obviously came to win. I mean, this was by far the hugest opportunity of his career. And so I'm sure that this ending was extremely disappointing and heartbreaking for Billy Joe, just with the amount of years that he's put in, work that he's put in, and finally he gets to showcase his skills to the world. And he did. Look for big things if he, chooses to keep on pursuing some big fights going forward, which I expect him to. Look for, big opportunities for Billy Joe. He showed out in those 8 rounds that he was in there. Again, to the viewer, it looked like either an even fight or maybe Billy Joe was winning by a round or something. So he conducted himself extremely well in the ring. It was just a disappointing method of stoppage for the crowd. Again, I think it was totally legit. I take nothing away from it because, again, Canelo landed a significant blow, and that's the game. If I punch you and I break your face, it is what it is. I mean, shoot, Billy Joe had a chance to break Canelo's face, and if Billy Joe caught Canelo with a shot that closed his eye up, swole his head up, damaged his orbital bone, then, to the victor go the spoils. Again, it is what it is. So Canelo blasted him with the significant punch that he had to. I thought he set it up well. Canelo has mastered becoming kind of a patient hunter. And again, Canelo's work to the body is tremendous. Vicious shots. And Billy Joe was trying not to get cornered, and he was doing a great job at not getting cornered, which is why I had him winning some of those rounds, because he was just doing the better boxing, in my opinion, in many of those rounds. But you saw Canelo kind of stick to the game plan, didn't get too flustered, started doing enough feinting to where Billy Joe would start to slow down just enough to get caught up on the ropes for just enough time for, again, Canelo to let another one or two vicious body punches go. And then he started to touch him up top a little bit more, and then he landed that crushing shot, totally owned that round. I wouldn't have given it a 10-8 round for Canelo, 10-9, but Billy Joe was too compromised after that round to continue. So the next piece of business then is Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant. He and Eddie Hearn, if Canelo chooses to continue to rock with Eddie Hearn, Matchroom, he's been fighting on DAZN for the last 3 fights now, they're going to have to do some business with PBC and Al Heyman's team to get that Caleb Plant, or should I say Canelo versus Caleb Plant fight together to unify all 4 major titles at 168. Big deal there. And I hope that they just get it done somewhat painlessly, and we see Canelo take on yet another style. Caleb Plant is also a sweet science, hit and not get hit type of guy, but a very different style than Billy Joe Saunders. Sometimes people think that all of these sweet science guys, Erislandy Lara, Billy Joe Saunders, Demetrius Andrade, Austin Trout, Caleb Plant, that they all have a similar thing going on stylistically, when in fact they have very contrasting styles. It just so happens that it results in, that it results in them hitting and not getting hit very much. So hopefully that unification fight gets made quickly. You would have to favor, Canelo Alvarez, pound for pound, the best fighter in the sport. He's got the toughest, strength of schedule in terms of elite fighters who are fighting other elite fighters. Canelo's resume is starting to stack up there with some of the legends of all time. Multiple weight classes. He's not afraid, man. And to anybody who he hasn't fought yet, I honestly don't think it's because he's afraid to fight anybody. I don't think he's afraid to fight Jermall Charlo. I don't think he's afraid to fight David Benavidez. I think that he's working through what's logically making sense. He declared his intention to collect all 4 titles at 168, so that's exactly what he's going out there and doing. What he does from then on, if he does collect those belts, is anyone's guess. He said he'll take on a Jermall Charlo, a David Benavidez, and even the beast up at 175, whoever's holding that spot, whether it's, Artur Beterbiev, who's currently holding 2 of the belts, or Dimitri Bivol, Joe Smith Jr. Sounds like Canelo's open to all the smoke. So, given his track record, given the fact that he fought 24 rounds with Triple G, whatever you think about the outcome of that fight, or of either of those 2 fights, just know he was in there for 24 rounds with Gennady Golovkin without hitting the canvas once, and basically fighting 2 very competitive and spirited fights, especially in that second fight. Canelo's a bad boy, man, and there's really not much you could hate on. And check it out. Just think, less than a year ago, we were in a place with Canelo where he was in a promotional dispute. We didn't know if his career was going to be shelved for the very near future, for the foreseeable future. This is during the pandemic. His last fight before the pandemic was his knockout win over he actually had a share of the light heavyweight title, he being Sergey Kovalev, an aging Sergey Kovalev, the crusher, but still effective, still holding a title. He had just come out of beating, Eleider Alvarez in their rematch and beating Anthony Yarde via knockout, handing him his first loss. So the crusher comes in there against a significantly smaller Canelo and gets knocked out. So after knocking Kovalev out, the pandemic hits. They have a big falling out, they being, Canelo, Golden Boy, and then DAZN. But they resolved the issue with Canelo and Golden Boy parting ways, but Canelo still fighting on DAZN and then temporarily working with Eddie Hearn. And now it looks like they're going to extend that relationship. So we went from having the champ on ice to coming back, announcing that the situation had been resolved promotionally, that he's scheduling a very quick fight with Callum Smith, the undefeated WBA champion. And then he dominates Callum Smith. And a lot of people going in thought, I wonder what this is going to look like. Because we had only seen him fight one guy at 168, he being Canelo. We had only seen him fight Rocky Fielding, who's not on the same level of Callum Smith. Rocky Fielding got knocked out like in the first couple rounds against Callum Smith. Maybe even the first round against Callum Smith. So Canelo ends up dominating the 6'3" Callum Smith. Keep in mind, Canelo's about 5'8", 5'9", and somehow is able to continuously pop Callum Smith with the jab while ripping his body. Man, Canelo looked like a beast in that fight. So then he follows that up just a couple months later, handling his mandatory challenger, Avni Yildirim, made easy work of him, knocked him out in a few rounds, and then a couple months later, fights Billy Joe Saunders, and then puts on this performance where this was a tricky fight for Canelo. This was a fight that, at least to my eyes, Canelo was having some difficulties winning those rounds and having some trouble seizing control of that fight versus Billy Joe. But he ends up stopping him, and now he's looking to tie it all up with the fight against Caleb Plant. I can't wait, man. But yeah, let me know what you thought about that fight. Let me know what you thought about those scorecards. Again, 6 rounds to 2, 6 rounds to 2, and 5 rounds to 3 for the 3 judges, all in favor of Canelo at the time of the stoppage. Look, I get that Canelo won anyway, so it's only academic to look at the scorecards, but that type of stuff matters, because my suspicion was that in the fight that it looked like Billy Joe might have been edging, that you could go to the scorecards and discover, yeah, Billy Joe didn't have a chance in hell in winning this fight because the judges were giving him no love, and that actually turned out to be the case. It just so happens that Canelo recorded the stoppage, so there's going to be less talk about that type of scorecard shenanigan. Yeah, but let me know what you thought about the fight, about Canelo's path forward, about the upcoming matchup between him and Caleb Plant, about how Billy Joe fought, and whether you would, be interested at some point in a Canelo versus Billy Joe rematch. I don't think there's a huge appetite for it, one, because of Billy Joe's style, and 2, just because, yeah, we want to see Canelo fight the next guy. And then can this guy beat Canelo? Can this guy beat Canelo? Well, Billy Joe had his spot, and he looked good. But again, if the guy catches you and he breaks your face, then that is what it is. It's not like an injury or like an unforced injury where it wasn't at the hands of Canelo. This was very much at the hands of Canelo. But yeah, please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.